Inshallah, we're about to begin, bi'idhnillah. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to get back to Luma by Imam Shirazi, inshallah ta'ala. Let me see if I can open up. Let me just close all this. I sent in the files for our courses, so I should be able just to open up one of those, bi'idhnillah. ممتاز. So we are in باب في أن الأمر يدل على إجزاء المأمور به. So we're still in al-amr. Let's see if they have it. Perfect. It's right there. We can just go close this side. Right? Make maybe one more size bigger. Maybe too much. Yeah, too much. Go down one. All right. I think that's good, inshallah. Let's go ahead and read بإذن نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى القبول. He says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ إِذَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بِفِعْلٍ لَمْ يَخِلْ المأمور إما أن يفعل المأمور به على الوجه الذي تناوله الأمر أو يزيد على ما تناوله الأمر أو ينقص. When a command is given, then what is expected is that the one being commanded either does it as the command says, or does more, or does less. This is what we can observe. There's really no fourth scenario for that, unless you want to add in not doing anything at all, but we're not speaking about those that are not doing it at all. We're speaking about the ones that do fulfill something. He says, فَإِنْ فَعَلَ عَلَى الْوَجْهِ الَّذِي تَنَاوَلَهُ الْأَمْرُ أَجْزَأَهُ ذَلِكَ بمجرد الأمر. If they do as they were told, then خلاص. Discussion is over. We don't need to discuss it anymore, and they fulfilled what they need to do. Tamam. He says, وقال بعض المعتزلة الأمر لا يدل على الإجزاء. إجزاء بارك الله فيكم in the Sharia is normally used for two different things. The first, it means doing that which you ought to be rewarded for doing. So that's your first type of ijza. The second type of ijza, fulfillment, kalam jameel, they said fulfillment does not necessitate reward. They said بل يحتاج الإجزاء إلى دليل آخر. If reward, kalam jameel, is not stated, then neither would fulfillment be complete. Let me give a better scenario for that, okay? So, as I said, ijza will refer to the reward. The other one would be fulfillment. So, think of it, someone was ordered to, and you can write this down on a piece of paper if you want, as I'm saying it, to pray. So, what did they do? They prayed. The question here is, A, is him praying suffice for him to be rewarded? Point B, is his praying correct fulfillment to the command? Tamam? So there's your basic argument. The Mu'tazila said him praying would not necessitate fulfillment and therefore would not necessitate reward. Kalam Jamil. He says, وَهَذَا خَطَأ, and this is wrong. Why did the Mu'tazila uphold that opinion? Because exactly what you are thinking about right now in your head. What are you thinking? That the prayer wouldn't be accepted unless all of the conditions are met. Right? And it's from that angle the Mu'tazila said, no, I'm going to need additional evidence that accepts how he prayed, and therefore we can speak about fulfillment and reward. He says, but this is wrong. وهذا خطأ لأنه قد فعل المأمور به على الوجه الذي تناوله الأمر. I want you to pay attention to this very carefully because this is very important, very crucial in the discussion. You see, Ahl Sunnah, when they say prayed, they mean they fulfilled all of the conditions and the commands. Because if they did not, then we wouldn't call that prayed. This is a very important concept because it actually comes up in the Shafi'i madhab time and time again. Think of this scenario, for example. Al-Imam al-Rafi'i said in al-Ghusl that there's 3 arkan, right? 3 pillars to ghusl. Mumtaz. What are they? He said, an-niyya. Then he said, إزالة النجاسة إن كانت على بدنه, right? Then he said, تعميم البدن, covering the body with water. They said to him, why removal of filth and then covering the body with water? The argument is, so that way he did a ghusl. They said to him, but wait a minute. تعميم البدن بالماء means that the entirety of the badan gets covered with water, right? Right. If there was still najasa on their body after they did ta'mim al-badani bil-ma', then they didn't do ta'mim. Because ta'mim, the concept, right, implies that I made sure that the water got to every part of my body. This is very important to understand. It's part of what that term is stating. In other words, when the Sharia says, Fulan, pray, then we understand from this command, go make wudu, make sure there's no najasa on you, do satr al-awra, dress appropriately, find a clean area and pray. We understand that because collectively that's what prayer is. It doesn't mean just stand up and go through the motion. No, it means all of the above. If you separate prayer from all of the above, you will distort the Sharia itself. So we keep its entire Shar'i, Fiqhi meaning, what we refer to in our classes as al-haqiqatu shar'iyya. That's why we have that to begin with. So that way when we hear salli, we know what that entails. If you separate between them, you'll cause a ripple effect throughout the entirety of the Sharia. Why? Well, because it doesn't say have a niyyah for tayammum anywhere. Where's that say? Where's it say if you go to make tayammum have a niyyah? Non-existent. So where do you get the niyyah from? إنما الأعمال بالنيات, that has nothing to do with tayammum. On what basis are you going to connect it? Any route that you'll use to connect it, I can shut it down for you because you separated it already. When you separated it, you've blocked your passages to claim that you need a niyyah. Now no niyyah is needed. Then what do? One might come and argue and say, but it's an ibadah and every ibadah needs a niyyah. I can tell you, no, it's not an ibadah. Why? Because it doesn't purify you. It doesn't really do anything. So, by disconnecting all of the elements, you have distorted fiqh from the beginning to the end. But when I tell you tayammum is following these set of statements, because that is what tayammum is. Because in the Sharia it said, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. These terms hold meanings. Those meanings we must keep as is correctly. فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا. That means go out to the dirt, find the dirt, utilize the dirt. But I'm not cleaning anything. How's this going to work? Well, you're going to have to intend by these motions that you're making that you mean it as a substitution for wudu. Now I'm going to tell you your niyyah now needs to be here because it's part of it. Okay, it's part of its structure. Once you come and say that when I say tayammum, you don't understand niyyah, you've just caused a ripple effect through everything that would throw everything into chaos. And this is a very, very negative way to look at the Sharia because we have Shar'i definitions of these terms. They must be maintained. Okay? He says, لأنه قد فعل المأمور به على الوجه الذي تناوله الأمر. As the command entails. Salli entails making wudu, removing of najasa, dressing appropriately, etc. If you don't do that, then technically you have not prayed. Tamam? He says, فَوَجَبَ أَنْ يَعُودَ إِلَى مَا عَلَيْهِ قَبْلَ الْأَمْرِ. Meaning that by fulfilling it as the Sharia has taught us to fulfill it, once fulfilling it, then you have fulfilled the command. That's called براءة الذمة. براءة الذمة. He says, فصل فأما إذا زاد على المأمور به بأن يأمره بالركوع فيزيد على ما يقع عليه الاسم سقط الفرض عنه بأدنى ما يقع عليه الاسم والزيادة على ذلك تطوع لا تدخل في الأمر. If the individual does more works from his own discretion, it's what he wanted, tamam, then those extras are considered tatawwu', meaning he is doing this voluntarily. Tamam. He says, وقال بعض الناس الجميع واجب. الجميع واجب داخل في الأمر. Some people said this additional act that this individual did would all still be considered wajib. Why? Because he was ordered to pray, say dhuhr. Once he completed the salah, it's done. Their argument is, if he still gets up to pray, then this would all be part of the dhuhr mainframe. Kalam Jamil. Their argument is, if he was told to go and pray, if he was told to go and do something, and he does more after fulfilling that which he was supposed to do, then the reward of all would be wajib. He says, وَهَذَا بَاطِلٌ. هذا باطل لأن ما زاد على الاسم يجوز له تركه على الإطلاق. Because that which goes beyond the command, the individual has the right to not do it altogether, since it's outside the realm of the command itself. كلام جميل. He says, فإذا لم يفعله أو فإذا فعله لم يكن واجبا كسائر النوافل. So the person doesn't do it, he's fine, like all of the sunnah prayers. كلام جميل. Many of the ulama, they said, maybe Imam Shirazi could have worded this a little bit better. What's the issue? The issue is as follows. The actual scenario of the discussion goes back to, like, you go into the salah. The Fatiha is wajib upon you. It's a rukn. And you decide to read a surah. What's that surah? That surah is sunnah. Okay, mumtaz. So we understand that surah is sunnah. Some people said, no, it's not sunnah, it's fard. Because it's within a fard. So therefore, it would be wajib upon you once you initiate it, while you're still in the bounds of the fard. Tamam. Another scenario that also comes up here. You start 2 rak'ah lillah, completely voluntarily. And in the middle of it, you want to leave it. Can you leave it? Yes or no? Some of the ulama, they said no, because once he has initiated this and started the obligatory acts that make up prayer, he can't leave it. He must finish it because now it's wajib. But the prayer is sunnah, yes. But since he initiated it, following the wajib steps, he must fulfill it because now it's all wajib. Those are the actual scenarios that the discussion is based on, not the scenarios that he was giving of a sunnah prayer. I mentioned his, and I just wanted to mention the actual scenarios that are part of the discussion, so that way you can be alerted to the reality of the scenario. Tamam? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Imam al-Subki, he mentions in his explanation of Minhaj al-Usul, he says that this mas'ala goes back to another mas'ala altogether, which states that which consists of an obligatory intro makes that which follows obligatory as well. Additions that the individual doing that are extras would not negate the primary obligatory entry act. In other words, like praying 2 rak'ah. It would be an obligation for you to have a niyyah, to say the takbir, to recite al-Fatiha. These obligatory acts that are part of the salah, as soon as you do them, it takes you into a realm of a long list of obligations. Without them, there would not be prayer, even though the entirety of the prayer might be looked at as sunnah. Kalam Jameel. And some said that there's a problem too in Imam al-Baydawi's presentation of the arguments and the discussions here. Wallahu al-musta'an. Moving forward, he says, فَأَمَّا إِذَا نَقَصَ مِنْهُ ما هو شرط في صحته كالصلاة بغير قراءة لم يجزه ولم يدخل في الأمر لأنه لم يأت بالمأمور به على الوجه الذي أمر به. If an individual impacts an obligatory act within the prayer, like the Fatiha, like praying without the Fatiha, then this would not be accepted from him, because in order for the prayer to be valid, conditions must be met. And technically, if he does not meet them, then he has not prayed. Wallahu a'lam. He says, وَإِن نَقَصَ مِنْهُ مَا لَيْسَ بِشَرْطٍ. However, if he does not do that which is not necessarily considered or looked at as a condition, right? Like saying the basmalah when you're making wudu, then that's okay and no major issue there, because it was not looked at as an obligatory act. Wallahu a'lam. He says, وهل يدخل ذلك في الأمر؟ قال الظاهر من قول أصحابنا أنه لا يدخل في الأمر. Does this, meaning the errors of that which is not obligatory within the act, would this, or would these things that are not obligatory, like the basmalah and wudu, would this be part of the command? Like when we get the command salli, do I understand to the basmalah or no? He said it appears that our ashab say it's not part of the command, meaning it's external, it's additional. Kalam Jameel. And this goes back to, after you receive a command, there are basics that we understand that are part of what makes up that reality. But then there are sub-scenarios, sub-details, and sub-categories that are not necessarily part of the command, but are understood of the command. Okay? يعني, we could even call it ما يفهم من الأمر, or مقتضى الأمر, and things of that nature, probably the closest way to look at it. Wallahu a'lam. He says, وقال أصحاب أبي حنيفة يدخل في الأمر. كلام جميل. يعني, when you hear the command صلي, then everything that's makruh for you to do in wudu and salah is understood as well as, okay, you ought to avoid these things. Tamam. We say no, that's not understood by default, because plus a lot of that can change with time and how people make wudu, what kind of containers. If you go back to, for example, in the makruhat of wudu and some of the sunan of wudu, or not even sunan, the mustahabbat of wudu, you'll see they vary greatly. If you're pouring water for yourself, the bucket should be on your right. If someone else is doing it, they should be off to your left. So with these continuous changes, one might argue that a lot of it might change depending on the scenario itself. It's very important to think about. He says, وَهَذَا غَيْرُ صَحِيح, meaning what As-Sada al-Ahnaf said is not sahih. Why isn't it sahih? He says, لِأَنَّ الْمَكْرُوهِ مَنْهِيٌ عَنْهُ فَلَا يَجُوز أَنْ يَدْخُلْ فِي لَفْظِ الْأَمْرِ كَالْمُحَرَّمِ. He's saying, well, this is not accurate. And the reason why it's not accurate is that which is makruh has dalil, like that which is haram. It has dalil. And since they have dalil, they are independent from the command. In other words, as long as something has its own dalil, then it's technically independent from the primary command. Tamam? Oh, Allah al-Musta'an. He says, and the next one, let's move on to the next. Let me scroll over here for you. أعلم أن الساهي لا يجوز أن يدخل في الأمر والنهي. This is a very important discussion. We probably will touch base a little bit on this from At-Tamheed, inshallah ta'ala. If you're with us in Waraqat, we actually touched base on this a little bit already. So we'll make it brief when we review it again. Tamam. So the sahi, the person who is oblivious to what's happening, the majnoon, the person that's insane, the person that's asleep, the person that did something assuming that they were doing the correct thing, kalam jameel, these people are not necessarily, some before, some during, some after, but they're not necessarily an average or an actual mukallaf at these certain moments. In other words, that which they do will not be classified as halal or haram. We can't. Because if we do, then that's going to have repercussions that don't add up with the Sharia. And we mentioned actually in Waraqat an example to this when we said that if someone were to enter their home, assuming that it's their home, and lay with their wife, assuming that it's their wife, that we would not call what they did halal or haram, because this is shubha, and therefore I can't call it halal or haram, and therefore I cannot punish the individual for doing it, because as I already said, it's not halal nor haram. Tamam? طيب. With that understood, he says لأن القصد إلى التقرب بالفعل والترك يتضمن العلم به. So if I take them in that moment out of the realm of taklif, therefore I classified it, their acts not as halal, not as haram. Mumtaz, mumtaz. So when it comes to the commands, the do's and the don'ts, at that moment, they're technically free of being included in it. That's why I said their act is not classified as halal or haram. Why? Because in order to be a proper mukallaf, you need to know what you're doing and what the commands are. And there can be momentary lapses that take place that cause a negative impact, that cause an effect that was not meant. Tamam? He says, حتى يصح القصد إليه وهذا يستحيل في حق الناس. A person that forgot altogether. So a person that eats during the day of Ramadan, by accident, they forgot that it was Ramadan. Well, am I going to say that they broke their fast? No, I don't say that. Well, if I don't say that they broke their fast, tamam, then they still are fasting. Then what's the case of this eating? Halal? Haram? Neither. And reality is it's neither. And we could probably call it halal majazam because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that Allah wanted to gift that person fasting something to eat. Tamam? He says, ألا ترى أنه لو قيل له لا تتكلم في صلاتك وأنت ساه لوجب أن يقصد إلى ترك ما يعلم أنه ساه فيه. If you told someone, don't speak when you're in the prayer out of forgetfulness, they'll have to seek out what is forgetfulness in this scenario, right? Like, what do you mean? تمام. وعلمه بأنه ساه يمنع كونه ساهيا. That's similar to when they say, you know when you're not crazy, when you're asking yourself, am I crazy? He's saying, if a person says, oh, am I forgetful in this prayer right now? Well, then you're not forgetful because you're asking the question whether or not you are forgetful, then obviously you are not forgetful. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala al-ismah. He says, فبطل خطابه على هذه الصفة. He says, فصل وكذلك لا يجوز خطاب النائم ولا المجنون ولا السكران لأنه لو جاز خطابهم مع زوال العقل يعني while they're not there, they're not mentally present, لجاز خطاب البهيمة والطفل في المهدي وهذا لا يقوله أحد. The khitab is not directed to the people that are asleep or those that are insane or those that are intoxicated. Kalam Jamil. Now, there's a point here we need to remember and keep in mind. If a person's intoxication was due to their own decision, they did it to themselves by drinking something they should not, without a legitimate reason to do so, then we still treat them as a mukallaf, but taghlidan. Yani, out of a punishment for what they have done, we say, no, you're mukallaf. That means as soon as they wake out of it, they need to fulfill that which they passed immediately. Kalam Jamil, immediately. And that's part of a punishment approach. Tamam. He says, وهذا لا يقوله أحد يعني لا أحد يقول بهذا الرأي. He says, وأما المكره, someone forced to do something. كلام جميل. فيصح دخوله في الخطاب. فيصح دخوله في الخطاب. تمام. والتكليف. Because he could fight back. He could fight back. تمام. وقالت المعتزلة لا يصح دخوله تحت التكليف. لا يصح دخوله تحت التكليف. He cannot be part of تكليف. Why? Because he's being forced. He's being forced for what? To do something wrong. He says وهذا خطأ لأنه لو لم يصح تكليفه لما كلف ترك القتل مع الإكراه. There are verses that literally state, don't kill people when you're being forced to kill people. Kalam Jamil. So, right there, you have a nas that's literally telling you that this mukrah has a command. تمام. قال ولأنه عالم قاصد إلى ما يفعله فهو كغير المكره. The person being forced, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he is being forced to do, and he's doing it anyway. كلام جميل. So, in many occasions throughout fiqh, they'll say that the person he was forced, but that which he did would apply nevertheless. And in some cases, they say no. But I won't get into that too much right now. I'll leave that for our fiqh lessons, inshaAllah ta'ala. He says, وَأَمَّا الصَّبِيُّ فَلَا يَدْخُلُ فِي خِطَابِ التَّكْلِيفِ فَإِنَّهُ وَرَدَ الشَّرْعُ بِإِسْقَاطِ التَّكْلِيفِ عَنْهُ. A child will not be part of taklif ever, because the Sharia was very blunt, was very clear that they will not be part of the rules of taklif. The Prophet ﷺ said, رُفِعَ الْقَلَمُ عَنْ ثَلَاثٍ, meaning three types of people will never be judged for that which they do when they are in these states. Who are they? The one who is sleeping until they wake, the child until they come of age, and the person who is mentally challenged or insane until they come back to sanity, if they are allowed to do so. He says, وَأَمَّا إِيجَابْ الْحُقُوقِ فِي مَالِهِ فيجوز أن يدخل فيه كالزكوات والنفقات، فإن التكليف والخطاب في ذلك على وليه دونه. But when it comes to things that pertain to their rights, there's going to be taklif. Think of it like this. Are we going to protect the child? Yes, of course, without a doubt. Then there are rights and commands that pertain and concern them. Do we have child support rules? Yes, of course. Then there's going to be types of taklif that pertain to them, but it won't be directed at them. It will be directed at their guardian, whether that's an actual parent or a foster parent or what have you, whoever the guardian might be. Tamam? He says, فصل وأما العبيد فإنهم يدخلون في الخطاب. Slaves are addressed and they are part of the khitab. كلام جميل. ومن أصحابنا من قال لا يدخلون في خطاب الشرع إلا بدليل. Some of our ashab, they said no, they won't be part of the khitab. Why did they say this? Because they looked at it as there are adillah, evidences that come and specify certain rules for the slaves. Therefore, this would mean they weren't part of the original, and these verses are alerting us to their special rules. But the majority of ulama, not only in our school, but in all schools, understood it the other way around. That they were part of the ahkam, but then they were excused or their laws changed in certain scenarios. Because that's the us, right? Men, women, everyone, children, all of creation. It's the same laws. But then exceptions happen for certain people, conditions, etc. Tamam? This is how it's understood by the majority. Only a very tiny minority argued for other than that. Tamam? And realistically, that argument is not that strong. You see, think about it like this. If you say that they are not part of the khitab, the original commands, then they don't have to pray. You'd have to prove that they need to pray. You're going to have a very tough time finding a verse that says that. Sure, you'll find a verse of a slave praying, but is it wajib upon them? And take that and apply that to everything. Do they have to do satr al-awra? Apply that. You're not going to be able, you're going to wind up telling them, anytime slaves were mentioned in the Sharia, that's what applies to them. Other than that, it's not. That's a very odd understanding that no one ever really upheld. And think about extending that to anyone else. Because if you're going on that basis, then we could argue in that same or with that same understanding that children are not part of the khitab. They will be successful in that one because they're not. But then let's continue down the train. Women are not part of the khitab. Now you would basically take half of the obligations upon women that naturally are understood from the Sharia and take it completely away. You see, there's no legitimate reason to take out a slave. And the justification that they used for the slave is technically very close to, not the same as, but very close to the legal structure for that of women. For example, we say a woman follows her husband. It's even like that in the West. Don't listen to the feminist media. She takes her husband's name, right? The husband is looked at as the head of the household. I mean, regardless of even who's the one that brings money into the family, the man is looked at as the lion, right? That's just the normal structure, right? And a lot of times, he can make it or break it, right? These concepts that come from this put the man at a similar state versus a master and the slave. Not in the same, obviously not the exact same, but very close to. She can't fast a sunnah fast without consulting him. She needs to let him know if she's leaving the house, where she's going, etc. Long list, right? The argument that they used was that the slave does not have complete control over what he wants to do. Bear in mind, I'll connect this to you in a very weird way. Remember in traveling in prayer, they said that if the slave does not know where the master is going, then the slave cannot shorten their prayer. But they also applied this to what? Soldiers that don't know where the general is taking them, slaves that don't know, wives that don't know where their husbands are traveling and taking them to. Because there's no perceived destination. And it's that same logic that they argued for them. See, he says, قالوا لا يدخلون في خطاب المشرع إلا بدليل. Their understanding is that they were never included in the main set of commands. That same argument can apply with that logic. That's wrong to women. Now, they didn't go that route with it. They didn't say that about women, but that's a problem in their thinking. That's why we said what? This is not correct. This is not right. This is not right. Rather, the Sharia came for all and then excluded some in certain different scenarios and details. That's why the Prophet ﷺ had to say what? رفع القلم عن ثلاث. Right? That's why he gave us the extra rules for women. This is why, and it's a long list of reasons that are well known and well understood. Therefore, that logic would not be correct. It's very important to understand why these understandings came to be. He says, فصل وأما الكفار فإنهم يدخلون أيضا في الخطاب. نعم, they do. And that's the mu'tamad. That's the asah. We say it like this. The khitab of aqidah, no doubt. The khitab of fiqh, it is the asah of the opinions, is that they are part of it. تمام. He says ومن أصحابنا من قال لا يدخلون في الشرعيات, meaning the do's and the don'ts. تمام. He says ومن الناس من قال يدخلون في المنهيات دون المأمورات, meaning they're in the don'ts but not the do's. The reasoning for this opinion is as follows. The people of Ahl al-Dhimma, they are ordered to respect Islamic law when living in Islamic land. That would entail avoiding the muharramat, at least in public, in Muslim land, okay, because that would be breaking our laws. From that concept came this opinion. Where did the second opinion he mentioned come from? That they are not included in the do's and don'ts, in the awamir, in the khitab. They said, well, because if they got up and they prayed, it wouldn't be accepted. So what's the point? They're doomed already. There's nothing they can do unless come to Islam. He says, وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى أَنَّهُمْ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي الْجَمِيعِ قوله تعالى ما سلككم في سقر قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. Why are you in hell? They say, oh, we didn't pray. We didn't pray. Well, that's one of the do's, right? That's a command. Some argued and said, well, hold on for a moment. It doesn't necessitate that. It could mean, well, we didn't come to the religion and pray like we were supposed to. Meaning, that's taqdeer mahdoof. Taqdeer mahdoof. Meaning, as Arabs normally do, they shorten their speech. They shorten their speech. This is why you have to be very, very careful, and you need to be aware of Arabic and how Arabs speak. Because you could easily, unknowingly, make a mistake in something that's very common because you're not understanding exactly how they talk. تمام. قالوا لم نكن من المصلين ولم نكن نطعم المسكين وكنا نخوض مع الخائضين حتى أتانا اليقين. If you take the combination of the verses, one might easily say, well, hold on. What it actually means is that we were not with the believers like we should. And if you go that route, then utilizing this verse to prove that they are addressed with the Sharia would be a problem. Kalam Jamil. Why is they mentioning prayer? Well, they're just mentioning the life of a believer. Tamam. Well, is there a better dalil for that they are addressed with the furu' of the Sharia? Yes. And it is the generality of the text itself. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. أقيموا. Who is it talking to? In Surah Al-Baqarah, when he says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. When he said, وَأَقِيمُوا, who is this command for? Is it for all of humanity? Or is it only for the believers? Many of the ulama of tafsir, they said it means be of and join with the Prophet and the believers, and be from them and with them. Okay, all right now. This right here would apply to all humans. All humans. Now, what's prayer? Prayer has conditions. Remember, we spoke about that earlier? So in order for them to fulfill them, they're going to need to become Muslim. That's what part of prayer is. In other words, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ is probably it's a stronger evidence than مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ. And others argued for other ways to look at the verses, but لا بأس. لا بأس. Collectively, we definitely see that they are, all of the kuffar, all of humanity are included in the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah ta'ala a'lam. And we're going to stop here inshallah ta'ala and pick up from the next segment in our next class that has to do with the women and are they part of it or not. And we'll be continuing that discussion inshallah ta'ala. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.